I have lived alone on this mountain for most of my life, and I will tell you something I learned the hard way. A man can fool himself into thinking he doesn't need anybody. He can build the wall so high and so thick that he forgets there was ever a door in it. I did that. I did it well. And then one night in the early dark of November, somebody knocked on that door, and everything I thought I knew about myself fell apart in the space of a heartbeat. Let me start from the beginning, the way a thing ought to be told. My name is Caleb Wren. Back then I was somewhere near 40, though I had stopped counting close. I trapped beaver and marten up along the high creeks above a place we called Coldwater Gap, and I sold my furs twice a year down at the trading post by the river. The rest of the time, it was just me and the cabin and the wind. I had built that cabin with my own two hands the year my brother died, log by log, and I had not meant for it to hold anyone but me. You have to understand what that country was like in winter. It does not warn you. The cold up there is not the kind you feel on your face in town. It is the kind that gets into the marrow of you and sits there, patient, waiting for you to make one bad decision. Men died every season up in those hills. Sometimes we found them in spring, sitting against a tree like they had just stopped to rest. So when the snow started coming early that year, I knew what was coming, and I did what I always did. I cut wood, I salted meat. I told myself I was ready. I was not ready, not for what came. It was the 8th of November. I remember because I had been keeping a little notch stick by the door, the way my father taught me, one cut for each day past the first frost. The sky had gone that low gray color that means the weather is thinking hard about something. By late afternoon the first real snow began, fat and slow at first, then thicker, until the trees outside my window were just gray shapes and the world had gone quiet the way it does under heavy snow. I had a fire going. I had a pot of beans and venison on the iron hook. I was content, or I told myself I was. Then I heard it. 3 knocks, soft. So soft I thought at first it was a branch knocking against the wall in the wind. I sat still and listened. The fire popped. The wind moaned around the chimney. And then it came again, 3 knocks, slower this time and weaker, like whoever was making them did not have much strength left to give. I will be honest with you. My first feeling was not kindness. My first feeling was a cold drop of fear in my belly because nobody comes to a mountain man's door at night in a snowstorm with good news. I reached for the rifle over the mantel. I went to the door slow, and I said, in a voice rougher than I meant it, "Who's there?" There was a long pause, then a woman's voice, small and shaking with cold. "Please," she said, "we won't be no trouble, just one night, just till the snow lets up." She had said we. I opened the door. I will carry that picture with me until the day I die. There was a woman standing there in the falling snow, and she could not have been much more than 30, though hardship had drawn lines on her face that made her look older. She had a thin shawl pulled over her head and shoulders, soaked clean through, and her lips had gone a color lips should never be. And against her, wrapped in what looked like every blanket she owned, she held a child. A little girl I'd learn later, maybe 5 years old, with eyes too big for her face, staring up at me without making a sound. And at the woman's side, holding tight to her skirt, stood a boy. Older. 8, 9 maybe. He had put himself half in front of his mother, this skinny, half-frozen boy, like he meant to fight me if it came to that. That boy stepping in front of his mother. I think about that a lot. He had nothing. He could not have weighed 60 pounds. And still he tried to stand between her and the danger. I have known grown men with rifles who had less courage in them than that child had standing barefoot in the snow. For a second none of us moved. "You'll freeze out there," I said finally. It came out almost angry. I think I was angry at the situation, at the snow, at the way the world keeps putting things in front of you that you cannot walk past. "Come in. Get to the fire." The woman's whole body kind of sagged with relief, and I saw her knees go for a second before she caught herself. I stepped back and they came in, all 3 of them, slow and stiff with the cold. The boy looked all around the cabin like he was counting the exits. The little girl never made a sound at all, which worried me more than crying would have. I shut the door against the storm and dropped the bar across it. I want to tell you how that cabin looked to them because I have thought about it since. To me, it was just my place. One room, a bed in the corner, a table, two stumps for chairs, a fire, my traps hanging on the wall, a shelf of tin, and a barrel of flour. Nothing. But I watched the boy's eyes go to the fire and the food, and I watched something in his face that I can only call hunger but bigger than hunger, and I understood that to them this little rough cabin looked like heaven itself. "Sit," I said, and I dragged the stumps over near the fire. The woman sat down hard and pulled the little girl onto her lap and held her close to the warmth. The boy would not sit. He stood by his mother with his jaw set. "There's beans," I said. "Venison in it. It ain't fancy, but it's hot." I ladled it into the only two bowls I owned and a tin cup besides, and I handed them around. The woman tried to make the children eat first, but I could see she was near to fainting, so I said, "Lo, ma'am, you eat too. They need you standing." And something in the way I said it made her listen, and she ate. I have watched a lot of hungry creatures eat in my time. I have never seen anything like those three children. Well, the woman too. She was half a child herself in that moment, going at that plain food like it was the finest thing God ever made. The little girl finally made a sound then, a small contented sound, and the woman closed her eyes for a second, and I saw her lips move, and I knew she was thanking the Lord, and I had to turn away and pretend to tend the fire because my own throat had gone tight. When they had eaten, the heat and the food did what heat and food do to the exhausted. The little girl fell asleep against her mother's chest. The boy's eyes started to droop, though he fought it like a soldier fighting sleep on watch. The woman looked at me across the fire, and for the first time I really saw her face in the light. She was handsome, I suppose, under the weather and the worry, with dark hair and a steadiness in her eyes that the cold had not been able to take. But mostly what I saw was tired. A tired that goes down to the bottom of a person. "I'm Della," she said. "Della Marsh. This here's Sam, and the little one's Ruth." "Caleb Wren," I said. "We're grateful, Mr. Wren, more than I can say. Come morning, soon as it's light and the snow lets, we'll be gone. We won't trouble you no more than the one night. I give you my word." One night. That was all she asked for. I want you to remember that because it matters to everything that came after. She did not ask for a home. She did not ask to be saved. She asked for one night of shelter, and she said it like she was ashamed to even ask for that. "Where are you headed?" I asked her. She didn't answer right off. She looked at the fire. "West," she finally said. "Got people out west, or had, we'll find them." It was a lie, and we both knew it. There was nobody out west. There was nothing out west but more mountains and more winter. But I did not call her on it. A person's lies are their own business, and besides, I had a feeling I was beginning to understand what she was really running from, and it wasn't a place she was running to. It was a place she was running from. I gave them my bed. I'm not telling you that to make myself out as some kind of saint, because the truth is I would have felt like a dog otherwise. I put the woman and the two children in my bed with every blanket I had, and I sat up by the fire with my coat and my rifle, and I told myself I was keeping watch on the storm. The boy, Sam, he tried to stay awake too. I saw him watching me from the bed, that wary look, like a young dog that has been kicked too many times to trust an open hand. After a while sleep took him anyway. But even asleep, his small fist stayed knotted in his mother's sleeve. The fire burned down low, and I fed it, and it burned down again. The wind screamed around that cabin all night long like something alive and angry. And I sat there, and I looked at those three sleeping strangers in my bed, and I felt something move in my chest that I had spent years teaching myself not to feel. I had been alone so long I had forgotten what a room sounds like when there is breathing in it that is not your own. I had forgotten how a sleeping child's slow breaths can fill up a quiet room like the sweetest music a man ever heard. I did not sleep much. Toward the gray hour before dawn the wind finally died, and in that new silence I heard the woman crying. Quiet. Trying not to wake the children. Trying not to wake me. She was crying the way people cry when they have been holding it for a long, long time and have finally found 1 minute where it is safe to let a little of it out. I did not say anything. Some things a person should be let to do in private. I just put another log on the fire so the cabin would be warm when they woke, and I sat back down, and I let her have her cry, and I made up my mind about something without quite admitting to myself that I had made it up. Morning came. It came cold and bright and merciless, the way it does after a big snow, the whole world buried white and the sun off it so sharp it hurt to look at. I had been outside already to check the woodpile, and the snow had come up past my knees in the open. I knew what that meant. I came back and stamping my boots, and the woman was up, the children still sleeping, and she had already folded the blankets neat and was standing by the door with that shawl back over her shoulders, ready to go. Ready to take two small children out into snow up past their waists, in nothing but worn-out shoes. "Thank you kindly," she said, "for everything will be." "You can't go," I said. She stopped. "Look out there," I told her. "That snow's up past my knees and it'll be over the little one's head where it's drifted. There's nowhere to go to. Nearest Seoul is the trading post, and that's a day and a half in good weather. You'd be carrying that child a mile before you all three lay down and never got up again. I have seen it happen. I will not have it happen on my mountain." I watched her face then. I watched the pride in her fight the fear for her children, and I watched the fear win, the way it should, the way it always should in a good mother. And I saw the tears come up in her eyes, and she said in a whisper, "I can't pay you, Mr. Wren. I got nothing. I won't take charity, I can't." "It ain't charity," I said, though it was, of course. I could use the help, wood and water and mending and such. A man alone falls behind on things. Which was the second lie told in that cabin, because I had never once in 15 years fallen behind on a single thing. But it gave her a way to say yes without breaking, and I have learned that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a proud person is hand them a reason. She looked at me a long moment. Then she nodded just once and looked away quick, and I knew it was settled, at least until the snow let up. I did not know then it would never really let up. Not all the way. Not before everything had changed. The thing about a heavy mountain winter is that it does not lift. It comes down in November and it sits on you like a stone until April. So when I told Della Marsh she could not leave because of the snow, what I had really done, though neither of us said it out loud, was tell her she was staying the whole season. There was no walking out of Coldwater Gap until spring. We both came to understand that over the next few days, and we both pretended for a while longer that it wasn't so. Those first days were strange. We were strangers shut up in one small room while the world froze solid outside. I will not pretend it was easy. I had been alone 15 years. I had my ways. I talked to myself, I'll admit it, the way men alone do, and I had to learn to stop. There was a woman in my house now and two children, and everything I did had to make room for them. But I will tell you the thing I had not expected. I had expected it to feel like a burden. It did not. It felt like the cabin had been holding its breath for 15 years and had finally let it out. The little girl, Ruth, was the first to come around to me. Children that small don't carry grudges against the world the way the older ones do. By the third day she had decided I was hers. She followed me everywhere I went in that one room, which was not far, and she would stand and watch me clean a trap or whittle a peg with her thumb in her mouth, and those big eyes just drinking it all in. The first time she laughed, I had pretended to lose my own thumb in my fist and then found it again, an old foolish trick. The first time she laughed, this little bell of a sound, I swear to you I felt it in my chest like a man feels the spring sun on the first warm day. Della looked up sharp when she heard it, like she had not heard her own daughter laugh in a long while, and her eyes went wet and she had to look away. The boy was harder. Sam watched me the way a sentry watches the tree line. He was polite, mind you. He said his please and his thank you. But there was a wall in that child, and behind the wall was something he was guarding, and it took me a long time to understand what. I started teaching him things because that is the only way I knew to reach a boy. I showed him how to set a snare for rabbit. I showed him how to read the snow for tracks, how to tell a fox from a marten, how to know which way the weather was turning by the way the smoke from the chimney lay down or stood up. He took to it. He had a quick mind and quicker hands, and a hunger to be useful that near broke my heart, because a boy that young should not feel he has to earn his keep just to be allowed to exist. One afternoon, maybe 2 weeks in, we were out in the cold checking a snare line he had set himself, just the two of us, and we found a rabbit in it, his first. He looked at it for a long minute, and then, without looking at me, in a flat little voice, he said, "Is this enough? Will this be enough so you'll let us stay?" I had to stop and crouch down in the snow to be level with him. "Sam," I said, "you don't have to catch anything to stay. You don't have to earn it. You and your ma and your sister, you can stay because I want you to stay. You hear me?" He looked at me then, finally, straight on, and his lip trembled just once before he locked it down hard. "The other place," he said. He said that too, at first. And that is how I started to learn the truth. It came out in pieces over those long winter nights, after the children were asleep by the dying fire, in Della's low voice. There had been a husband. He'd died of a fever 3 winters back, and he'd been a good man, by everything she said, and she had loved him. After he passed, she had no people and no place and 2 small children, and a woman in that country with no man was a woman in deep trouble. So when a man named Roderick Vane came courting, a man with land down in the valley, a man with money and a fine house, she had told herself it was the sensible thing, the safe thing, for the children. She married him. I think you can guess the shape of it. Vane was charming until the wedding and a different creature after. He had wanted a woman to keep his house and warm his bed, and he had taken her children as part of the bargain and resented them every day for it. He drank. And when he drank he was cruel, first with his words and then with his hands. Della bore it. Mothers bear an astonishing amount for their children. But the night he turned that hand on Sam, the night he struck the boy hard enough to put him on the floor for the crime of spilling a cup, something in Della broke, or maybe something in her finally stood up. She took the children and what little she could carry, and she walked out of that valley into the coming winter, because she had decided, plain and simple, that the cold mountain could kill them, but at least the cold mountain did not hate them. That is who knocked on my door. A woman who had chosen freezing over a roof because the roof had teeth. When she finished telling me that first time, neither of us spoke for a long while. The fire popped. I'm not a man of many words, and I had none at all just then. Finally, I said the only true thing I had. "He won't get to you here." And I meant it down to my bones, though I did not yet know how soon I would be tested on it. The winter went on. And here is the part that is hard for me to put into words, because it happened so slow and so quiet that I did not notice it happening until it had already happened. That cabin became a home. Not my home. Ours. Della mended things I had not even known were torn. She made my poor cooking into something a person looked forward to. She sang while she worked, low, old songs, and Ruth would sing along with the words she knew and make up the ones she didn't. Sam and I would come in from the cold, cheeks burning, stamping snow, and there would be light and warmth and food and the sound of women singing. And I tell you, I have stood at the door of my own cabin with my hand on the latch, and not been able to go in for a minute because my chest was too full. I had been a man with a wall around himself. I had thought the wall was protecting me. I came to understand that winter that the wall had not been protecting anything. It had just been keeping me from this. From a little girl falling asleep against my arm. From a boy showing me, shy and proud, a snare he'd set just right. From a woman across the fire whose eyes I had started to look for the moment I came in from the cold. I won't pretend I didn't come to love her. I did. But I held it quiet, because she had been used hard by one man, and the last thing on God's earth I wanted was for her to feel she owed me anything of that kind for the shelter. I would have kept them safe and warm and asked nothing the rest of my days, and counted myself the luckiest man alive just for the singing. But the world does not leave such things be. It never does. It was March. The worst of the snow had broken, though winter still had teeth, and the high passes had opened just enough for a hard man to get through if he was determined. And Roderick Vane was a determined man. A man like that does not let go of a thing he considers his own. Not a horse, not a dog, not a wife. It was never love that drove him. It was ownership. And somewhere down in that valley, his pride had been festering all winter long. The pride of a man whose woman had walked out his door, and he had asked his questions and followed his rumors. And one cold, bright morning in early spring, Sam came running up from the creek white as the snow. "Riders," he gasped. "Two riders coming up the gap, Ma, it's him, it's him." I've never seen the color leave a person the way it left Della Marsh in that moment. She went to the children quick, gathering them behind her, that old animal instinct, and I saw in her face the whole winter undone in a heartbeat, all that healing torn back open. And in that same heartbeat, I felt something rise up in me that I had not felt in many years. Not fear. The other thing. The cold, steady thing that comes over a man when there is finally something in front of him worth standing for. "Get in the cabin," I said. "All of you. Bar the door behind me. Sam, you remember where I keep the second rifle." The boy nodded, white-faced but steady. "You don't open that door for anybody but me. You understand. Anybody but my voice. Now go." Della grabbed my arm. "Caleb, he's a hard man. He's killed before, they say. Please don't." "Della," I said, and I put my hand over hers just for a second, the first time I had ever done such a thing. "You knocked on my door once and asked for one night of shelter. I gave you a home instead. I'm not about to let a man come up my mountain and take it. Now get inside." She looked at me, and whatever she saw in my face made her go. I checked the load in my rifle, and I stepped out into the bright cold morning to wait for them, alone, in front of my own door. And I heard the bar drop behind me, and I heard, very faint through the logs, the sound of Ruth beginning to cry and her mother hushing her. And I set my feet in the snow, and I watched two riders come up out of the trees at the bottom of the gap, and I made ready to keep the only promise that had ever truly mattered to me. They came up slow, picking their way through the broken snow, two men on tired horses. I had time to take their measure before they got close, and I used it. The man in front did not have to tell me he was Roderick Vane. I knew him the way you know a wolf from a dog at a distance, by the way he carried himself. He was big, broad through the chest, dressed in a heavy coat that had cost money, with a fine hat and a finer rifle across his saddle. He rode like a man who had never once doubted that the world would arrange itself around what he wanted. The other man, riding a little behind, was a lean, hard fellow with a face like a hatchet, the kind of man money hires, the kind that does not ask what for. I stood where I was. I did not raise my rifle. I just held it easy across my body the way a man does, and I waited, and I let them come to me. Vane drew up maybe 20 feet off. His horse blew steam. He looked at me, and he looked at the cabin behind me, and a slow, ugly smile came onto his face. "Morning," he said, pleasant as you please. "Looking for my wife, woman by the name of Della, run off with my two children back in the fall, been told she came up this way." His eyes flicked to the smoke from my chimney. "Looks like I was told right." "Don't know any wife of yours," I said. The smile thinned. "You want to think careful about lying to me, mountain man. That's my family in there, my property. The law's on my side and so's the Lord. A man's got a right to his own." I have turned that word over many times since. Property. He said it about a woman and two children the way I'd say it about a trap or a sack of flour. And I think that one word told me everything I needed to know about Roderick Vane and made everything that came after easy in my mind, whatever it cost. "There's no property up here," I said. "There's people, and the people up here are staying up here. You can turn around and ride back down to your fine house in the valley, Mr. Vane, and you can tell yourself whatever story lets you sleep. But you're not coming through this door." His face went dark. The hired man's hand drifted toward his coat, slow, and I let mine drift the same way toward my rifle's action, slow, so we all understood each other. "You die," Vane said low, "over another man's woman." "She's not another man's anything," I said, "and I'd do a great deal worse than die before I'd hand a child back to the hand that knocked him down. You hit that boy, Vane, 8 years old. You want to talk to me about the Lord being on your side?" Something happened in his face when I said that. I had landed it true, and we both knew it, and a man like Vane cannot stand to be seen, not truly seen, by anyone. The pleasant mask fell all the way off, and what was under it was ugly and afraid, because that is the secret of men like that. Under the cruelty there is always fear, the fear of a small man who knows he is small. And a frightened man with a rifle is the most dangerous thing on God's earth. "Take him, Cobb," Vane said. It happened fast, the way these things do. The hired man, Cobb, went for his pistol. He was quick, but I had been watching his hand the whole time, and I had 15 years of a life that depended on quick hands, and I brought my rifle up and put a ball through the meat of his shoulder before his pistol cleared his coat. He howled, and his horse reared and dumped him in the snow, and his pistol went off into the air, and the sound of it rolled away down the gap and came back off the far ridges. But that left Vane, and in the half-second I had spent on Cobb, Vane had snatched his fine rifle off his saddle and swung it on me, and there was no time at all left. And I knew the way you know a thing in your body before your mind catches up, that he had me, that I had bought Della and the children that half-second, and it had cost me everything, and that I was about to die in the snow in front of my own door. And then the cabin door flew open. "Sam." The boy had not stayed barred inside. Of course he hadn't. He had come out the little window in the back, the way I'd shown him a fox comes out a second hole, and he had come around the side of the cabin in the snow with the second rifle in his small hands. The rifle I had taught him to load, to hold, to fire, never once dreaming why he might one day need to know, and he had it up against his shoulder, this boy, this skinny 8-year-old boy, and it was pointed dead at the man who had beaten him. "You leave him alone," Sam screamed. His voice cracked clean in half on it. Tears were streaming down his face, and his whole body shook with the weight of the rifle, but the muzzle did not waver, it held right on Vane's chest. "You leave my pa alone." My pa. I do not have the words, even now, even all these years gone by, for what those 2 words did to me. I had been a man waiting to die, and that word reached into me and put my whole life back in my hands. And it stopped Roderick Vane cold. He turned that fine rifle off me and onto the child, and his face was a thing I will not try to describe, and for one terrible frozen heartbeat, I thought I was about to watch the worst thing a man can ever watch. But in that heartbeat I moved. I crossed the ground between us before I knew I'd done it. I did not shoot him. I have thought about why, and I think it was because the boy was in the line, and a part of me too did not want Sam to watch a man die through a barrel he was holding, did not want that to be in him for the rest of his life. So I did not shoot. I drove into Vane and took him off his horse, the both of us going down hard into the snow, and his rifle fired wild into the trees, and then it was just the 2 of us, fists and snow and the old animal business of it, and I will tell you plain. All the winter's gentleness went out of me, and I was the mountain again. I was the thing that survives up here when softer things lie down and die. I do not remember it well. I remember it ended with him under me, and my hands, and the certain knowledge that I could finish it, easy, that no court in that country would even ask me a hard question about it. And I remember Della's voice. She had come out too, of course, with Ruth's face buried in her skirts, and she said just one word. "Caleb." That was all, just my name. But it was full of something, not fear of him, fear for me. Fear of what it would do to me. Fear of what those 2 children watching would learn about the world if they saw me become, even for a righteous moment, the same kind of thing that Vane was. I stopped. I got up off him. I was shaking. I stood over him with my chest heaving, and I said, in a voice I barely recognized, "Get your man and get on your horses and get off my mountain." And if I ever see you in this country again, Vane, I will not have a child or a good woman here to stop me. You understand what I'm telling you?" He understood. Whipped men always understand. He crawled to his horse and he got his bleeding hired man up across the second one, and the two of them went back down the gap the way they had come, smaller and smaller, until the trees took them, and the mountain was quiet again, and the smoke from my chimney stood up straight and white into the blue. I never saw Roderick Vane again. I heard, years later, that he drank himself into the grave down in that valley, alone in his fine house, and I cannot honestly tell you I felt much of anything about it. I turned around. The three of them were standing in the snow in front of the open door, and Sam had dropped the rifle and he ran at me and hit me around the middle and held on like he was drowning, and I was the only solid thing in the water, and he was crying, finally, all of it, the whole winter and the whole year and the whole hard short life of him coming out at once. And I got down in the snow and I held that boy and I let him. And over his shaking shoulder I looked up at Della. And she was crying too, but it was a different kind, and Ruth had toddled out and grabbed onto my arm, and Della came the last few steps and she did not say anything. She just put her hand on the side of my face. The way you touch something you have been afraid to believe is real, and I put my own rough hand up over hers and held it there. We were married that spring, down at the trading post, by a circuit preacher who happened through, with the river running high and loud with snowmelt, and the whole green world coming back to life all around us. Sam stood up beside me. Ruth carried wildflowers she'd picked herself and dropped most of them on the way. It was the plainest wedding you ever saw, and I would not have traded it for a king's. That was a long time ago now. The children are grown and gone, with children of their own. Sam took land of his own further up the valley, a good man, a kind father, the kindest you ever saw with his own boy, which I do not think is any accident. Ruth married a schoolteacher and she writes us letters in a fine looping hand. Della's hair has gone gray, same as mine, and we sit out on the porch I built on the front of that old cabin,